The morning mist rolled through the valley of Sekigahara like a shroud. It was October 21st, 1600, and before the day was done, the fate of Japan would be decided in a single savage battle. For over 100 years, the country had been tearing itself apart. Clans rose and fell in an endless storm of war and betrayal. The Warring States period, the Sengoku Jidai, was an age where samurai dreamed of ruling Japan, and most died trying. But that morning, two armies faced each other that would finally bring it all to an end. After the death of the great unifier Toyotomi Hideyoshi in 1598, Japan's fragile peace collapsed almost instantly. Hideyoshi's young son, Hideyori, was too young to rule, so a council of regents was formed to govern in his name. But power, as always, is a dangerous thing to share. On one side stood Ishida Mitsunari, a loyal administrator determined to protect Hideyoshi's legacy. On the other, Tokugawa Ieyasu, a patient, calculating warlord who saw opportunity in the chaos. Their conflict wasn't just political, it was personal. Mitsunari believed Ieyasu had betrayed the Toyotomi cause, while Ieyasu viewed Mitsunari as a weak bureaucrat meddling in matters of war. The nation split into two camps: the Western Army, loyal to the Toyotomi; the Eastern Army, united under Tokugawa. Every clan, every samurai had to choose. And in feudal Japan, the wrong choice could mean extinction. Sekigahara was no ordinary valley. It was a crossroads, hemmed in by mountains, soaked by autumn rains and cloaked in fog. It was the perfect trap. On the night before the battle, Ieyasu's scouts could barely see a few feet ahead. Mitsunari's forces held the high ground, ready to crush the Tokugawa army once it entered the valley. The numbers were nearly even: 82,000 for the Western Army, 89,000 for the Eastern. Among Ieyasu's men was Ai Naomasa, the commander of the Red Devils, samurai famed for their blood-colored armor and reckless courage. Mitsunari's plan looked brilliant on paper. Once Ieyasu's troops engaged, his allied generals on the surrounding hills, men like Kobayakawa Hideaki and Mori Hidemoto, would descend, surrounding the Eastern Army from all sides. But there was one fatal flaw. Mitsunari couldn't trust the men he depended on. Several of those very generals had already promised to betray him. At dawn, the fog clung to the ground so thick it muffled even the sound of armor. Then, around 10 a.m., it lifted, revealing a sea of banners snapping in the wind. Ai Naomasa's crimson-clad warriors roared forward, muskets cracking, arrows hissing. Steel met steel in a storm of screams and smoke. For hours, the two sides clashed in brutal chaos, formations breaking, reforming, dissolving again into mud and death. And still, Mitsunari waited. He looked to Mount Matsuo, where Kobayakawa Hideaki and his 15,000 men stood watching. The plan depended on him joining the fight, but Hideaki hesitated. Then came the moment that changed everything. Impatient with his indecision, Tokugawa Ieyasu ordered his gunners to fire on Hideaki's position, not to kill him, but to force his hand. Cannon smoke filled the air. The message was clear: choose now. Hideaki chose. He charged down the mountain, but not against Ieyasu. He turned his army against Mitsunari's own men. The betrayal was like lightning. Other clans followed his lead, switching sides mid-battle. The Western Army, once confident, began to crumble. By midday, the valley had become a slaughterhouse. Mitsunari's men fought desperately to hold their ground as betrayal after betrayal shattered their lines. Then came one final, legendary act of defiance. Shimazu Yoshihiro, refusing to surrender, led his surviving warriors in a furious charge straight through the heart of the Tokugawa ranks. They hacked their way through, breaking out of the encirclement, a move that would become immortalized as one of the greatest last stands in samurai history. By sunset, the smoke began to clear. The banners of the Western Army were torn and bloodied. The field was silent except for the cries of the dying. The Battle of Sekigahara was over, and with it, the Warring States era ended. When the dust settled, Tokugawa Ieyasu stood victorious, surveying a field of corpses and broken flags. The country had bled for a century to reach this moment. Now, he would take everything. But the battle was just the beginning. The world that followed would change Japan forever. By the mid-19th century, the Tokugawa system, the world's most orderly isolation, was showing cracks. The economy had shifted beneath it. Merchants, once at the bottom of the social hierarchy, had grown rich through trade and urbanization. Samurai, meanwhile, often found themselves broke, living on fixed stipends that no longer matched the rising cost of living. The social order that had been so rigidly maintained was quietly turning upside down. And then, in 1853, the illusion of isolation shattered. 4 massive black ships sailed into Edo Bay under the command of U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry. Their cannons, powered by steam and smoke, were unlike anything Japan had ever seen. Perry delivered a letter demanding that Japan open its ports to American trade. The shogunate, humiliated and unprepared, signed the Treaty of Kanagawa the next year, ending over 200 years of seclusion. To many Japanese, it was a national disgrace. To others, an unavoidable awakening. To the samurai, it was the beginning of the end. The arrival of the foreigners divided Japan's elite. Some samurai, especially from powerful domains like Satsuma and Choshu, believed Japan needed to modernize quickly to avoid colonization. Others, fiercely loyal to the old ways, saw modernization as betrayal. The rallying cry became Sono Joy. Revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. But the truth was complicated. While preaching to expel the foreigners, many reformist samurai secretly studied Western science, weapons, and industry. They saw that Japan's survival depended not on isolation, but transformation. The tension escalated into open rebellion. Between 1864 and 1868, pro-imperial and pro-shogunate forces clashed across Japan in what became known as the Boshin War. And for the first time in centuries, the samurai, Japan's proud warrior class, fought one another not for conquest, but for the soul of their nation. In 1868, the imperial loyalists triumphed. The Tokugawa shogunate was abolished, and Emperor Meiji was restored to power. But restored is misleading. The Meiji emperor was not a warrior king taking back his throne. He was a symbol of a new Japan, one that would adopt Western industry, military organization, and government. The samurai class, however, was left behind. Their stipends were converted into bonds. Their swords, once sacred emblems of their honor, were banned in public by the 1876 Sword Abolition Edict. The class that had ruled Japan for centuries was erased in a generation. Some adapted, becoming teachers, bureaucrats, or officers in the new imperial army. Others clung to the old ways, their pride crushed, their identity shattered. Among the disillusioned was Saigo Takamori, a former samurai of Satsuma, and one of the key figures who had helped overthrow the shogunate. But when the new government he helped build turned against his class, westernizing Japan and stripping samurai of their status, Saigo could not bear it. In 1877, he led 40,000 samurai in rebellion against the Meiji government. It would be known as the Satsuma Rebellion, the final stand of the samurai. They fought bravely but hopelessly against a modern conscript army armed with rifles and artillery. The samurai's swords and valor were no match for the new age of gunpowder and machines. In the end, Saigo's army was annihilated. Mortally wounded, Saigo reportedly took his own life, choosing death over surrender. The samurai era ended not with peace, but with a final, defiant war. With the Meiji government victorious, Japan accelerated toward modernization. In just decades, it transformed from a feudal backwater into an industrial power capable of defeating China in 1895 and Russia in 1905. But even as the old order vanished, the spirit of the samurai never truly died. Their ideals, loyalty, discipline, and self-sacrifice were absorbed into the new Japan, shaping its military ethos and national identity. Bushido, once the private code of warriors, became the moral backbone of the state. In the 20th century, that same spirit would re-emerge, in both glory and tragedy, as Japan rose again, not as an isolated island nation, but as a world power. The Tokugawa peace had built a world without war. The Meiji Revolution destroyed it to survive, and the fall of the samurai, both noble and tragic, marked not the end of Japan's spirit, but its rebirth into the modern world.